The city of St. Lo was the US Army's key to breaking out of Normandy into the French hinterland. On the morning of July 11th of 1944, the 116th Regiment, the 29th Infantry Division, advanced toward Martinville Ridge, 2 miles east of St. Lo. The German defenders were deployed in ideal positions along a sunken road fortified with barbed wire and mines. The Stonewallers of the 116th Virginia National Guard Regiment that traced its heritage to Thomas J. Stonewall Jackson's command in 1861, attacked at 6 hours, preceded by a furious 1-hour artillery barrage. As the 116th moved toward the Hedgerows, dozens of men were mowed down by enemy fire. Captain Charles Cawthon, 2nd Battalion Executive Officer, recalled the horror. Quote, "A pall of smoke was over the fields, holding in it the sweet, sickening stench of high explosives, which we had come to associate with death. The attacking riflemen, visibly shrunk in numbers, crouched behind the farthermost hedgerow, while volumes of artillery, mortar, tank, and machine gun fire flailed the fields beyond." End quote. So what I'm reading here right now is an article that I have found in HistoryNet, which is called The Battle of the Hedgerows. I'm going to be reading this in this video, and then I'm going to give my own commentary as I start to relate this to the operation that I am sharing with you in the channel from Combat Mission Beyond Overlord, which is called the Battle of Martin Ridge. So let's get on with it and let's see what we can learn here, which is a pretty interesting article, pretty interesting battle as well, and it has a lot of bombardments. By the time the Stonewallers finally penetrated the first line of defense, the rifle companies, normally numbering 150 to 180, had been reduced to about 60 men apiece. For the American GIs, this bloody struggle became an all too familiar scene throughout their advance on St. Lo, an operation that came to be known as the Battle of the Hedgerows. By the end of June 1944, the US First Army had successfully established a beachhead on the Normandy coast and captured the port of Cherbourg. Supplies and reinforcements were rapidly building up for a powerful offensive designed to break out of the Normandy pocket. One of the first objectives was to capture the crossroads town of St. Lo and then use that location as a jumping-off point for a major breakout into the heartland of France. Taking the city, however, involved a grueling struggle for gains, often measured in terms of a few hundred yards, through a succession of hedgerows against a bitterly determined enemy. St. Lo was inhabited by approximately 12,000 people and located on the high ground above the Vier River. The older sections of town dotted the river bluffs, while the newer parts of the city spread across the Vier Valley and up the slopes of several encompassing hills, offering a commanding view of the city and surrounding countryside. Although Allied bombers had reduced the city to a pile of rubble, it still had significant military value. Branching out from St. Lo were a series of 8 major roads and a rail line. On the western edge of town was an important bridge that spanned the Vier River. At this point, I remember the tutorial in Combat Mission Beyond Overlord, because in the tutorial, you begin in this map where you can see the Vier River. It's mentioned in the tutorial, so it's pretty nice. Approaches to St. Lo were swarming with strong points and a powerful occupation force, primarily survivors of the 352nd Infantry Division, which had been fighting the Americans since the first landing at Omaha Beach, was entrenched in the city and surrounding hills. As if that was not enough, the First Army would have to operate in terrain characterized by swampy fields, steep wooded hills, and an extensive maze of hedgerows. What the article refers as hedgerows is pretty much the bocage. The bocage um, that is going to be very, very prominent in these battlefields in France. In Europe, more likely. Some of the best German defenses in Normandy were not built by Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, but by farmers more than 1,000 years before the battle. The terrain, locally called the bocage, there you go, consisted of small, irregularly shaped fields enclosed by ancient overgrown hedges. Grown primarily to keep cattle in and to mark boundaries, these massive lines of shrubbery grew up to 15 feet high, limiting visibility to one field at a time, and were extremely dense obstacles, even for tracks. They formed thousands of square miles of tough terrain connected by a network of sunken roads, often the bush connected overhead, trapping the GIs inside a tunnel of vegetation. First Army Commander Lieutenant General Omar N. Bradley recalled, quote, "It was the damnedest country I've ever seen," end quote. Now, it is very well known that the tanks, they had these grappling hooks, or they have these artifacts in front of them that they would use to smash through the bocage. Actually, if you go to the manual in the Combat Mission Beyond Overlord, you're going to see a dedicated part that explains this. Using the natural camouflage and concealment of the hedgerows, the Germans dispersed small, heavily armored anti-personnel and anti-tank units that dug in. The primary weapon of defense was the MG-42 line machine gun, supported by artillery and mortar fire. At the corners of each field, the Germans emplaced heavy machine guns to pin down attacking infantry in the open. Light machine guns were positioned to the front and flanks to inflict casualties on advancing GIs seeking cover and concealment. Bradley's plan to seize Saint-Lô called for a broad front offensive designed to prevent the Germans from concentrating their forces. Major General Troy Middleton's the 7th Corps would capture the city of Coutances in the west, while Major General Charles A. Collett's of the 19th Corps joined forces with the 5th and 7th Corps in an advance on Saint-Lô. By the way, there's no mention here on Major Bingham, which is the major that we impersonate in the operation. So let's continue. On July the 3rd, the 8th Corps moved out from its jumping off point toward Coutances. The Germans, taking full advantage of the high ground, employed 88mm anti-tank guns, tanks and machine guns to stop the Americans' advance, called General Dietrich von Scholtitz established a formidable line of defense near the town of Le Has-du-Put, which dominated the approaches to Coutances. By early evening, Middleton's corps had suffered more than 1,000 casualties, with little ground gained. By nightfall on July the 8th, the 8th Corps had suffered an additional 3,000 casualties, nearly 40% of its available riflemen, and was still bogged down. At that point, Bradley was beginning to have second thoughts about his decision to launch the drive towards Coutances. So we can see that the Germans have established a very, very strong defensive position, especially because they have the high ground, which is mentioned here. On July the 4th, Bradley shifted his focus on Saint-Lô. The first prong of the advance was led by the 7th Corps commander, Major General J. Lawton, Lighting Joe Collins, and the men of the 4th, 9th, and 83rd Infantry Divisions. However, swampy terrain and narrow roads forced Collins to commit only one division at a time. The inexperienced 83rd Division, commanded by Major General Robert C. Macon, led the attack, followed by the 4th and 9th Division respectively. The objective was to reach the Perrières-Saint-Lô highway From there, the corps could spread out and advance southwest towards Saint-Lô. The attack was immediately met with German artillery and machine gun fire from Major Friedrich von der Heydт. He was a battle-hardened 6th Paratroop Regiment and elements of the 17th SS Panzergrenadier Division. The results were devastating. On the first day of operations, the 83rd lost 1,400 men for a meager 200-yard gain. The swampy hedgerow terrain was hardly conducive to offensive action, and rain and cloud cover negated the possibility of any Allied air support. So at this point, we're seeing that we are here in, if I remember correctly, July the 4th. So it's 1 week before the operation starts in the combat mission Beyond Overlord. So because of the heavy rain and cloud cover, Allied air support was negated. Okay? And they have been pounding the Americans since the beginning, since the beginning of the operation. On July the 5th, the battle recommenced along the Carentan-Perrier road, but the 83rd Division attack units barely advanced a mile up the road at a cost of 750 casualties. So they were advancing very, very slowly on the mud, being pounded by the Germans, and they were losing quite a substantial amount of troops because of this. I'm going to continue reading here. In his book, The Normandy Campaign, Victor Brooks described the Americans' frustration, quote, communication breakdowns, wrong designation of map locations, and less than inspired leadership turned what had already been an agonizingly slow advance into a glacial crawl, end quote. Very, very descriptive, this paragraph, and it seems that at this point, it was almost impossible to advance in these fields. In an attempt to break the bloody stalemate, Collins ordered the more experienced 4th Infantry Division to the front line. The veteran Ivy Division accomplished little, okay? However, and by July the 7th, the 1st Army had advanced less than 21 miles. As the 7th and 8th Corps were slugging it out against a determined enemy, General Corellet, 19th Corps, the 29th, 30th, and 55 Infantry Divisions began its offensive against the battle group of Heinz, the last force standing between them and Saint-Lô. The mission was to cross the Vire River and to Vire Canal, then advance south towards Saint-Jean, a crossroads town fronting Saint-Lô. The Vire was a rapid stream that was 10 feet deep and 60 feet wide, with high, steep banks, while the Tot-Vire Canal was 5 feet and 20 feet across, with gently sloping banks. The plan called for a two-pronged attack on Saint-Jean, located 3 miles from both the river and the canal. In order to achieve the objective, Major General Leland S. Hobbs, commanding officer of the 30th Division, needed to get his men across both water barriers. So this is crossing the Vire. We are at July the 7th right now. So at 3 hours in the morning on July the 7th, 32 assault boats from the 30th Division entered the river, preceded by a bombardment by 8 field artillery battalions. As waves of GIs pushed across the Vire, German riflemen, machine gunners, and mortar crews opened up from the opposite banks. The much diminished enemy, stretched thin to defend a massive front, was unsuccessful against the larger American force and was forced to pull back to Saint-Lô. By nightfall, the capture of Saint-Jean was completed. While the men of the 30th Division prepared for a thrust on Saint-Lô, the German High Command was finalizing plans for a major counterattack. General Paul Hauser, commander of the German 7th Army, responded to the American crossing to the Ville by ordering troops from the Saint-Lô garrison to temporarily block the 19th Corps advance until the reinforcements arrived from Caen. This tactic was a temporary solution until Hauser could meet with the Army Group B commander Rommel to discuss strategy. Mindful of the critical situation facing him, Rommel decided to pull the tough Panzer Lehr Division out of Caen and bring it west to defend Saint-Lô. He also deployed the 2nd SS Panzer Division in the Viertot to slow down Hopp's advance until Panzer Lehr arrived on the battlefield. The German High Command felt that if Saint-Lô capitulated, the whole front line might collapse. So at this point, Rommel is panicking, and he's noticing that if the Americans take Saint-Lô, everything goes to hell. Very, very interesting. To prevent Rommel from shifting his men over to the Saint-Lô sector, Bradley ordered the First Army to attack all along the front. Middleton's 7th Corps, reinforced by the newly arrived 8th Infantry Division, pressed that attack on the right flank, and on July the 9th, La Haye-du-Pou finally fell, and meanwhile Collins from the 7th Corps renewed the attack along the Carentan-Perrier road, but gained little ground at heavy cost. Major General Raymond Barton's the 4th Infantry Division lost 2,300 men in 10 days of fighting. The 83rd Division didn't fare much better, losing 5,000 men in the same time span. Barton summed up the situation, quote, "The Germans are staying in there just by the guts of their soldiers. We outnumber them 10-1 in infantry, 50-1 in artillery, and by an infinite number in the air." End quote. Aided by the cover of darkness and inclement weather, Lieutenant General Fritz Weierlein, the wily commander of the superb Panzer Lehr Division, was able to redeploy most of his vehicles to the final assembly area. By the evening of July the 10th, the Panzer Lehr and the 2nd SS Panzer Division sat poised for a dawn attack against General Hopp's 30th Division. Allied intelligence caught wind of the German counterattack, however, and a deadly game of chess ensued as Bradley ordered elements of the 9th Infantry and 3rd Armored Division into position to counter Rommel's move. In the early morning of July the 11th, Weierlein's Panzer Lehr Division, taking advantage of poor weather conditions, delivered a staggering blow to the Americans. The 902 Panzer Grenadier Regiment, supported by 20 tanks, attacked advanced units of the US 30th Division, while the 901 Panzer Grenadier Regiment, supported by a dozen Panzer Kampfwagen Mark V Panthers, slammed into elements of the 9th Division. So we're approaching now July the 12th, which is the beginning of the operation. So let's read on. At the onset, the Panzer Grenadiers gained the upper hand in the growing slugfest. Weierlein's powerful forces advanced behind the American lines and overran 2 battalions' command posts, capturing several units of GIs assigned to guard the Vir Canal. By 6:30, the Panzer Lehr Division had mentally blocked the American offensive. Nevertheless, an endless supply of M4 Sherman tanks from the 3rd Armored Division, combined with the efforts of the 30th and 9th Infantry Divisions, began to weaken the German attack. Now the Shermans are coming in. American GIs open up with deadly crossfire from positions in the bocage, while the 899th Tank Destroyer Battalion challenged the enemy panzers. In the afternoon, the cloud cover cleared, and American fighter bombers raced across the battlefield, pounding the remaining tanks. By nightfall, Weierlein had paid for temporarily containing the First Army's breakthrough with the loss of 500 to 700 men, including several battalion commanders and 32 tanks. Just in at the it was like let me see, it was at the morning of the July the 11th. It was at the morning of July the 11th that the Americans managed finally to bombard the enemy positions. 2 years later, while interrogated as a U.S. Army prisoner of war, Bayerlein recalled that Panzerlehr lost 50% of its attacking force, a low estimate in comparison to American claims. Bayerlein attributed the carnage to the exhaustion of his men prior to battle and the difficulty of operating Panthers in the confined bocage. This is another thing that is stated in Combat Mission Manual, that German armor tanks are unable to move through bocage. Just to get a more accurate depiction of the situation. The interrogation report stated that, quote, his armor had to fight at maximum ranges of 200 yards because hedges concealed everything farther away, end quote. In hindsight, light tanks could have performed better in the difficulty hedgerow terrain, but Bayerlein did not bring them because his intelligence sources had informed him the area was suitable for tank operations, which was not, because of the bocage. Consequently, the Panzerlehr was severely crippled by the combined onslaught of the US 9th and 13th Divisions, eliminating the possibility of a large-scale counterattack west of the Ville. On the morning of July the 11th, as the Panzerlehr Division was making its thrust behind the American lines, the First Army launched simultaneous attacks in an effort to close in on Saint-Lô. The 2nd Infantry Division, 5th Corps, attacked Hill 192, a promontory overlooking the Saint-Lô road east of the city. Defending that dominating observation post was a single battalion from Lieutenant General Eugene Main's 2nd Parachute Corps. At 6, the 2nd Division began its assault, overwhelming stubborn resistance to secure Hill 192 by noon. When the dust settled, the 2nd Division artillery alone had fired 20,000 rounds on the German position. Meanwhile, Major General Charles H. Gerard, commander of the 29th Infantry Division, began his attack in conjunction with the 2nd Division assault on Hill 192. That morning, the 29th Division 116th Regiment advanced towards Martinville Ridge. There we go, we're reaching the moment. Located on the eastern outskirts of Saint-Lô. Paratroopers of the German 3rd Paratroop Division recently arrived to reinforce the 352nd Division, waited patiently in the hedgerows for the Stonewall Brigade. As the Americans unknowingly entered the enemy kill zone, dozens of them were cut down by explosions and machine gun fire, which is clearly depicted in Operation Martinville Ridge, in which we can remember right now from the AARs that I've been putting on the channel, that they were very, very strongly positioned in choke points, in foxholes, shooting heavy machine gun and also heavy bombardment, which is accurate enough to say that it's pretty nice. So let's see what Gerhard, Major General Gerhard, I think Gerhard, what the guy that is here, the allusion of the guy called Major General Charles H. Gerhard is basically the Major Bickham that we are looking in the operation that we are mentioning from Combat Mission. Okay, so let's continue here. Quote, my squad, as far as I remember, was really butcher up, end quote, recalled Private John Robertson of the Company F. Quote, some of us were blown forward, some backward. It was a big mess. When I regained my senses, I got up and started limping back. As I was slopping along thinking about why my shoe was full of water, I felt my leg and my hand went all the way to the bone. It was blood that I was slopping in, end quote. Through the remainder of the day, Gerhard doggedly ordered his battalion and regimental commanders to continually assault the German defensive position regardless of casualties. After several attempts, the 116th finally broke through. That night, following a 3,000-yard advance, the weary Stonewallers dug in. With what cost? That's the big question here. By what cost? By what cost is the big question. Many soldiers from the 29th Blue and Gray Division became casualties because Gerhard tried to push through positions deemed untenable. Uncle Charlie, as he was known to the men of the 29th, was an uncompromising commander whose enthusiasm often exceeded his judgment. He either relieved or threatened to relieve commanding officers who were unwilling to attack because of high casualty rates. You can imagine you are trying to advance in this field full of bocage, full of hedgerows, and you are being bombarded. So at that point, Gerhard realized that Saint-Lô could not be captured without first taking Hill 122. And here is where I think they are talking about the hill that we see in the operation in CMBO, which is the hill that we are trying to take just slightly after Martinville Ridge. So this is the hill because Gerhard realized that you must take that key position, which I really mentioned in my strategic thinking in the operation of the war game. So he ordered his division, including clerks. Now he's ordering his division plus all of the personnel that is not fighting personnel. So he's ordering clerks, cooks, drivers, and other rear echelon personnel to fix bayonets and prepare to advance on the city. He will take the city or die trying. Some rifle companies were critically understrength, and at least one platoon was down to its last 3 men. Can you imagine that? From the solely by the bombardment, by the previous bombardment, what the hell? Cynical whispers began spreading among the troops that, quote, Gerhard has a division in the field, a division in the hospital, and a division in the cemetery, end quote. Uncle Charlie did little to silence the sarcasm when he told his commanders to, quote, expend the whole battalion if necessary as long as they capture Saint-Lô, end quote. Okay. Pretty tough. Tough stuff. Gerhard planned a full-scale attack all across the 29th Division front to commence on July the 13th. This is the historical account, the historical AIR, one day after. So he planned a full-scale attack with the main force concentrating on Martinville Ridge. The 2nd and 3rd battalions of the 175th Infantry, supported by 2 companies of the 747th Tank Battalion, would lead the advance southwest, pass through the 116th, and attack due west along the Bayou Highway in Saint-Lô. Prior to the attack, U.S. Army Air Force's fighter bombers would soften up the German defenses. Although the plan was militarily sound, it began to unravel from the onset. First, the airstrikes was called off because of poor weather again. Next, 2 companies from 747th Tank Battalion were unable to support the attack because of ammunition and fuel shortages, beginning the supply problem here. And last, communication problems between the 2nd and 3rd battalions bogged down the advance, resulting in a gain of a few hundred yards at a cost of 152 casualties. Fortunately for the Blue and Gray, the 29th, there were indications that the fighting was also taking its toll on the Germans. American artillery, called down to support troops' movements, had apparently caught the Germans by surprise. The road was littered for miles with dead soldiers. dead horses, and shattered enemy equipment. The foul smell of burnt flesh was everywhere. While the 29th Division continued its advance to St. Lo, Corps Commander Charles Corlett ordered the 35th Infantry Division to capture Hill 122. It was the 35th Infantry Division who captured Hill 122. In July 15, the 35th Division, 134th Infantry Regiment reached the hill crest. The next day, the 35th Division secured the objective, 3,000 yards north of the city. So now, the hill in July the 15th is firmly secured by the Americans, which is a key position of the map. And he managed to reach, because of the artillery, because of the help of the support of the artillery. Artillery support is crucial in here. I'm going to stop here because the article continues. If you want to continue reading, I'm going to leave it on the description if you so wish, but I'm going to put here a little bit of my own commentary here in between the other commentaries that I have made right now. So, as you have seen, this is a map in which you have, I mentioned this at the beginning on the analysis of the terrain that I did, that the hill is a very crucial point. It's a major key position that we have to take. It's a major key position in which I placed the target for the bombardments, which I am really, really happy to have been done that. And it is very nice to see how in CMBO they have programmed this operation very, very on par with the actual anecdotes of this battle, of the real battle, because you can remember that at first it was static, and even though you didn't see the mud and all of the stuff that is extra fluff for graphics and stuff like that, but you can tell that it's very, very well done. The map, I am enjoying the map a lot, and I really, really want to see how this develops. The fact that you have 20 turns per battle is another interesting thing, because you can quickly, you can advance very slowly. This is the thing here. You have to advance very slowly. And I think that the decision to make this battle like this, to have programmed the whole operation, the whole battle in this regard, it was clever, it was smart, because it really feels that you are really advancing very slowly, because you can take your time. And eventually the bombardments that, if you remember in my AIRs, I have been saying, where are these forward observers? That's a pretty straightforward answer. They are from the hill. They are coming from the hill. So you can see that in this anecdote, that evidently they are coming from the hill, and that's a thing that we must take. And the other important thing to take note in here is that Martinville Ridge is one of those battles in which you cannot stay static. You cannot stay without moving. You have to continuously move yourself, because you know that you are going to be bombarded. Up until the point that you reach to the key position, you are going to still be bombarded. So that's something that you have to take into account. You have to move slowly because of the defensive foxholes that are scattered all over the fields. And the other thing is the bocage. The bocage, nicely for, or luckily for the Americans, is that the bocage helps them to cover themselves. In real life, I mean, because I'm not sure if in combat mission the bocage is actually covering you, but I can see that it is a little bit difficult for the units to cross the bocage. So I really think that it was very nice to read this article now that we are in that specific map, and hopefully you like it. If you like this format that I just came about, please let me know in the comments. See you in the next one.